From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's New York studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Iran fires more than 100 missiles at Israel in its second direct attack in 6 months, coming as Israeli forces launch a targeted ground incursion into Lebanon. We'll have much more with former U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta.
The escalating conflict putting a spotlight on foreign policy on the night of the first and only vice presidential debate, with Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz set to share a stage just 4 hours from now.
We'll discuss the stakes for the running mates with our signature political panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano with us for the hour, along with Emily's List President Jessica Mackler, all ahead on the Tuesday edition of Balance of Power. A big night here, Kaylee, in New York City. The candidates are here, the running mates at least, for what could be the final debate of this cycle.
Yeah, this is the last one that is scheduled, as there will be no second debate to this point between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And of course, as we've been leading up to tonight, the news has been dominated not by domestic politics, but by foreign affairs, with what's going on in the Middle East and Iran launching a long-expected retaliatory strike against Israel, though the strike was largely unsuccessful, with many of those 180 missiles that were sent being intercepted.
This is going to be part of the debate tonight. Surely it's part of the backdrop here as we talk about geopolitics, knowing as well that Kamala Harris spent a good part of her day in the Situation Room with President Biden monitoring this situation. We did hear from the president earlier.
At my direction, the United States military actively supported the defense of Israel, and we're still assessing the impact. But based on what we know now, the attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective.
Joining us now for more is Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams, who leads our U.S. national security coverage. So, Nick, we heard Israel and voices from the administration today warning of consequences. What's likely to happen next here?
Well, really what happens next is anybody's guess. We did see Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying essentially that if you attack us, we're going to attack you. So all eyes now on the expected Israeli response. We're going to be drawing a lot of comparisons to April after the Iranian strike you mentioned then. Israel responded in a very minimal and targeted way, and there was some indication we got of behind-the-scenes channeling between the U.S. and Israel, where the U.S. essentially persuaded Israel not to strike in a big way to avoid provoking even greater escalation in this conflict. But, you know, this time we do have indications, in part from the video footage you're seeing right there, that a lot of these missiles did get through. That's going to be very different from the April attack. So you can expect that the Israeli response will likely be even stronger than it was back then.
Indeed, the video that we're showing our TV audience shows missiles being intercepted over Jerusalem, over the skyline of Jerusalem on this 1st of October. Nick, do we know to what extent the U.S. helped to defend Israel? Was it like what we saw in April?
Well, a very different attack this time because it was almost exclusively, I believe, exclusively ballistic missiles. So there were not those slow-flying drones that were shot down by fighter jets. So we're hearing from the U.S. the assessment is there were about 200 missiles fired from Iran. The U.S. Intercepted or fired about 12 interceptors, they're saying. But otherwise, any missiles that were knocked down were hit by that Israeli air defense system that has been so successful so far. But you know, a lot of indications, while they're saying no casualties or possibly one casualty, one person died in the West Bank, it does look like some of these missiles did get through and hit targets. So we are expecting that there would be some damage.
It's a really important update from Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams, with still much more to learn. Nick, thank you for being with us here on a very busy day. The other, of course, big story, and this all feeds into the debate between vice presidential candidates Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance. It'll be taking place just blocks away from where Kaylee and I are sitting now in Midtown Manhattan, and that is where we find Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern from the spin room at the debate. Annmarie, how is it there?
Well, everyone here is getting excited, Joe. The debate kicking off in just 4 hours' time. But you're just talking to Nick Wadhams there about what's going on in the Middle East, and that's obviously going to be a topic that likely will play in this debate. There's really three main stories right now, whether it's on American shores or off, that have impacts to the U.S. economy. And, of course, that is what is going on in the Middle East. I'm sure they're going to be asked questions about how they, as vice presidential candidates and potentially will be vice presidents, set deterrence in the region. Then, of course, the ports, which are disrupting half of U.S. trade right now with that union on strike. And then, of course, Hurricane Helene. All of these stories potentially could be inflationary and could be something that these candidates would have to deal with. So potentially those are going to be some of the policy topics discussed this evening. But I expect more style, less substance tonight. That's what everyone is talking about. But the fact is, we're 5 weeks away from the election. The polls are very tight in these 7 swing states. So any sort of momentum a campaign could grasp onto, they're going to. But the one golden rule of being a running mate is to do no harm. That is really the golden rule. So whoever comes out of this the most unscathed probably will win the evening.
All right, Bloomberg's Annmarie Hordern live on the spin room floor. We'll be checking in with you throughout the night here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you so much. Now, as Annmarie mentioned, dock workers walked off the job at midnight this morning in a strike that's hitting 36 ports across the East Coast and the Gulf states. Those ports have the combined capacity to handle as much as half of all U.S. trade volume. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was asked about the strike at her briefing this afternoon.
How we see this moving forward as it relates to the economy and potential impacts is that we're going to continue closely monitoring the situation. We're going to what this could have potentially on the supply chain impacts, assessing ways to address any concerns if necessary, and the president and the vice president, as I said at the top as well, are being briefed. They were briefed on the agency assessments that show limited impacts on critical consumer needs at this time.
Republican lawmakers, meantime, are urging the administration to get involved to end the strike. Joining us now for more is Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson in Washington. And Wendy, it's a very tricky line to walk if you are saying you are the most pro-union administration in American history, and also a union is potentially disrupting your attempts as the Democratic Party to keep the White House. How does the administration do this?
It is so tricky, Kayleigh. You are so right about that. This is, the economy and prices at the grocery stores and, your normal everyday spending is the top issue among voters 5 weeks out from the election. And yet, Kamala Harris cannot anger labor. She cannot, seem to be working against unions, high wages, better wages, fighting against automation, which are what the longshoremen want. And so President Biden so far has said he will not invoke Taft-Hartley. He will not demand for the good of the nation that this strike stop, at least not yet, so that Kamala Harris can manage to not, lose the labor vote. But I think if this drags on even a little bit, and I'm talking days, not weeks, I think the White House may think about changing their mind, because this just gives fuel to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance tonight to be able to say, look, they can't keep the ports open. Your prices are going to go up. Oil is already up because of the conflict that Nick talked about in Israel. And so this is just not what the Democratic ticket needed right now.
Of course, there's a lot of concern, again, and you're alluding to this, Wendy, what the impact might be on prices with several weeks remaining here to do some potential damage. If this is in fact costing some $4+ billion a day and has the potential to stoke inflation just at the time when people are preparing to vote in November, how does that add up for the final results in this race?
Well, as we know, we've talked about all the polling is showing this deadlock tight race where a matter of a few thousand votes, maybe 10,000, might make a difference in this race. And if people start to see the prices of fruits and vegetables, which is most impacted by this strike, fruits and vegetables going up, groceries, the parts. I think I saw that, a peanut butter maker is worried about the jars that they import for the peanut butter. So peanut butter is going to go up. Supplies might go down. And that is like I said, not when the economy is the top issue for voters. That's not good for the few people who are still making up their minds, and that could make the difference.
As we watch this debate tonight, Wendy, it's great to have you from Washington. Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson. Thank you, as always. Coming up, we'll be joined by the former Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, with our eyes on the Middle East. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We're proud of the actions that we've taken alongside Israel to protect and defend Israel. We have made clear that there will be consequences, severe consequences for this attack, and we will work with Israel to make that the case.
That was Jake Sullivan, of course, National Security Advisor, speaking earlier today at the White House following Iran's attack on Israel. 100-plus ballistic missiles. Joining us now at this important and delicate moment is Leon Panetta, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense, former director of the CIA. Mr. Secretary, it's great to see you. We've been looking forward to the conversation here and hungry for your insights with so little that we know right now. There's a lot of talk about consequences. I'd like to know what you think the appropriate response should be from Israel and whether Iran is done.
Well, right now, Joe, I think the concern is that we're headed towards a wider war. Israel has done a pretty effective job going after Hezbollah's leadership, Hamas's leadership, but they're now engaged in a ground war that, while limited in scope, once you get into that area with mountains and tunnels, you're never quite sure what is going to happen. Now, Iran has responded with almost 200 missiles. And while it may be largely effective and ineffective in terms of its impact, these are ballistic missiles. These are big missiles. They have struck some targets. And I think Israel has made clear that it now will respond. And so the question is going to be, what kind of response do we now see? Is it going to be targeted? Is it going to be aimed at military targets? Or is it going to be aimed at populated areas? That'll tell us a lot about how far this war is going to expand.
Well, if Israel does choose to respond, Iran has been warning that any further response from Israel would face a subsequent and crushing response, according to what they posted on social media today. Mr. Secretary, you talked about the kind of powerful missiles that were sent here, nearly 200 of them. Is this the worst Iran's got to send Israel's way? What would a further substantive, crushing response actually look like?
Well, these are ballistic missiles. They're much more powerful than the ones that were involved in the attack, the kind of drone attacks that occurred in April. So this is a powerful response by Iran. However, obviously, because of the Iron Dome and the defense systems that Israel has and the help of the United States, most of those were able to be brought down. But some did hit their targets. I think particularly in Gaza. We'll find out those reports later. But there's no question that Iran has additional missiles and that they may very well use additional ballistic missiles in the future. So this tit for tat is going to go on for a while. It isn't going to suddenly come to an end. The real question is whether Iran, in the end, wants a wider war, whether Israel ultimately wants to strike back at Iran. That'll tell us a lot about whether or not we're going to see a much wider war in the Middle East, which I think will be bad for all the parties.
Well, this is the question, of course, that's so difficult to answer, Mr. Secretary. We've been warned for generations about this moment, what it would mean for global security. And here we stand today talking again about Iran conducting a direct attack against Israel. To what extent can the U.S. help to contain this, help to keep this from becoming a wider war? Is it simply military presence? We've been surging troops and material into the region for weeks now to try to keep this from happening.
No, I think it's very important to continue to expand our deterrence in the region. That means adding additional Navy vessels, and we are. There are carriers that are now deployed to the area. We've increased the number of troops. We've increased the additional presence of other capabilities in that region. So we sent a clear signal to Iran that the United States has indeed expanded our ability to respond if the United States is hit in any way. So I think that's an important step. I think you've got to show Iran that if they in fact hit hard again, that it's possible that Israel, supported by the United States, will have to defend that area and defend their troops. That's going to be the issue. The issue right now is whether or not Iran really does want that expanded war. They know that if we get into an expanded war, it means the end of their regime. And so for that reason, I think right now the best tactic is to expand our deterrence, expand our capabilities there, and make clear that if Iran does something wrong, they're going to get hit hard.
Mr. Secretary, we have less than a minute left, but of course there is a vice presidential debate happening tonight. What would you advise Governor Tim Walz to say on this issue?
I think it's really important to stress that the next president of the United States has to be a strong commander-in-chief who believes in world leadership, believes in alliances, and believes that it is incredibly important for the United States to be involved in efforts to try to bring about world peace. And I think that that's going to be a growing issue in this campaign, which is the issue of just exactly which candidate would be the strongest commander-in-chief in confronting the challenges that are out there.
All right, sir, we really appreciate your time this evening. That's Leon Panetta, former U.S. Secretary of Defense. And still ahead, Jessica Mackler, president of Emily's List, will be with us as we continue to look ahead to tonight's vice presidential debate. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. Just over 3.5 hours from now, Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz will begin their debate here in New York, where we're broadcasting live, set to field questions from moderators on a number of issues, including reproductive rights. For more, we're joined now by Jessica Mackler, president of Emily's List, which is dedicated to electing Democratic pro-choice women to office. Welcome back, Jessica. Great to have you. What do those Democratic pro-choice women, or frankly pro-choice independents or otherwise across the country, want to hear from these two candidates tonight?
Well, what pro-choice voters want to hear, and we know that that is the overwhelming majority of voters, are voters who believe that we should have the freedom to make these choices for ourselves. What they want to hear tonight is what is the contrast between these candidates? And that is something that we've talked a lot about through this election and will be on display tonight, which is that we have a choice in this election between a ticket and Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who are going to move us forward, who have pledged to restore the rights and the freedoms that have been taken away from us, versus Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, who really represent the polar opposite. You know, J.D. Vance has said that he would like to see abortion illegal nationwide, totally illegal. That is where he stands. And we know that if Donald Trump and J.D. Vance get into power, that is what they are going to do. They are going to pursue a national abortion ban and some of the darkest elements of Project 2025. And so that is the choice that's in front of voters in November, and what we need to make sure is in front of voters every day until then.
So what should be Tim Walz's posture on this issue tonight? It sounds to me like no matter what comes up, you and your membership would like to hear him change the topic to this very potent issue, knowing there are single issue voters watching here, and that this is a way to keep J.D. Vance on the defense. Is that right?
Governor Walz has a really incredible story to tell when it comes to reproductive freedom. The work that it was done in Minnesota really demonstrates what we can do nationwide if we put Democratic pro-choice leaders in power. They have secured abortion rights in Minnesota. And so that is the opportunity that voters have in this election on a national level. So I would expect that Governor Walz, he's done this work. He knows what he's doing. He is going to talk about that, his history on the issue of reproductive freedom, and talk about connecting that back into the vision that Vice President Harris and he have for this country as one in which we can make sure that everybody has these freedoms, that it's not just determined by your zip code.
Well, Jessica, as we consider how this issue is playing in the critical states that ultimately could decide this election, we did get news out of Georgia just this week where a judge overturned the state's 6-week abortion ban. It now is a 22-week limit instead. Do you worry that makes a difference in terms of the galvanizing effect restrictive abortion laws could have in a state that is such a battleground?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to say that anytime we have an opportunity for people to access health care and abortion care and have these restrictive bans lifted, that is a good thing. When it comes to the political issue, the truth is that what voters don't like is this idea that their rights and their freedoms should be determined, like I said, by the zip code they live in, or should be at the whims of a judge. Whether you get a judge who supports reproductive freedom or one who's been appointed by extremists and will hold up these bans, as has happened in so many other places across the country. The truth is that every single person in America should have access to this health care. We've seen the devastating impact when they don't. And that is what voters want, and that's what they're voting on.
To what extent is this debate tonight a fundraiser?
Well, I don't know about a fundraiser. I think, anytime we have an opportunity for candidates to be in front of voters, it's an opportunity for them to talk about their visions and to share with the American public where they stand, the contrast between them and their opponents. And I think for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, they have really done an incredible job of laying out a vision for the future. And that's something that we've seen a response to. Yes, grassroots fundraising.
This is an opportunity, though, for Emily's list, right? You must have the emails ready to go out tonight to click the button. This is one of the last major moments in this campaign.
Well, it is true that we have just a few short weeks left in this election cycle. And so we're using every possible opportunity that we can, debate nights or not. It is really about making sure that people know what we're doing, the programs that we're running, but more than that, making sure that we get in front of voters. So that's absolutely critical today and every other night between now and November.
Well, it's great to have you back, Jessica Mackler, president of Emily's List, with us on this debate night. I'm Joe Matthew in New York alongside Kaylee Lyons as we count down the hours here to that debate. It begins at 9 p.m. Eastern time. Kaylee, our special coverage starts at 8. We have a lot of interesting voices. That spin room is going to be well populated tonight.
Well, and they might be having to talk about more things in the spin room than they initially thought coming into today.
Oh, true.
As what was an issue that could have been about reproductive rights and the economy overall quickly could turn into strife over the Dockworkers strike.
Indeed.
Potentially, of course, the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and escalation in the Middle East.
Reminds us you can't prepare for everything on a night like this. That's just why we're going to be watching very closely and bringing this debate to you live here. Coming up, more on what's happening in the Middle East and how it plays into this debate on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Joe Biden is one of the strongest pro-Israel presidents in American history, and he's been walking a tightrope in the Middle East where there are no good choices that come to the resolute desk in the Oval Office. He is rejecting calls from the hard left that would have had the United States handcuff Israel and prevent the return of any hostages and platform Hamas for post-war governance in Gaza. But he's also rejected calls from the hard right that are seeking to directly escalate and enmesh U.S. troops in Middle Eastern warfare.
Democratic Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts on the early edition of Balance of Power today. Of course, following Iran's ballistic missile attack against Israel just hours ago and the political implications here in the U.S. Joining us now to continue our conversation, Morgan Ortagus, founder of Polaris National Security, former spokesperson at the State Department. Morgan, it's great to have you with us here at a precarious moment here in geopolitical history. We've actually seen this happen now twice in 6 months. And Congressman Auchincloss was responding to Republican criticism that we've heard around the horn today, that this would not not have happened during the Trump administration, that Joe Biden is partly to blame for what has taken place here. And that's an important part of the conversation with Kamala Harris, of course, running for president now. You served in the Trump administration in the State Department. How do you see it?
I did. I also would remind you that I served in the Obama administration in the Middle East in his first term. So I understand the thinking behind both Republicans and Democrats in Washington, D.C. And I would say this is really pertinent not only for what's happening in Israel today, but also what we will likely see at the VP debate tonight. I think J.D. Vance is going to be able to ask Tim Walz why the Biden-Harris administration has pursued the policy that they have with the Islamic Republic of Iran over the past 4 years. So remember, coming into this administration, one of the first things that Biden and Harris did at the United Nations was to make sure that the sanctions against the missiles that you saw Iran use today, they made sure that those expired at the United Nations, and now you see Iran using them. We also know, not because not because there wasn't new sanctions, but because of lack of sanctions enforcement. This is an important distinction. Iran is billions of dollars richer, to the tune of anywhere from $80 to $100 billion richer, because they have been able to export their oil. What you'll often hear the Biden administration say is, well, we put all of these new sanctions on Iran. While they have put new sanctions on, they haven't enforced existing sanctions. They haven't taken the steps that we took in the Trump administration, which is to actually take Iranian oil off of the market. And that's why Iran is so much richer, and that's why they are able to supply these terrorist groups in the region, Hamas,
China that's
Hezbollah,
buying
and the Houthis.
Iranian oil? Is this actually a China problem?
Yes. It is. That's a really great point. And it was the same problem for us in the Trump administration. It was China, it was Iran, even Japan and other nations. It was an incredible diplomatic feat in order to go to those countries and get them to stop purchasing Iranian oil. And even in the case of China, we often had to do sanctions against some Chinese companies if they evaded sanctions. If you're going to threaten sanctions, then you have to be there with the enforcement and the follow-up. So that's an excellent point. We had the same exact challenge in the Trump administration, no difference.
Well, we're spending time on the causes here, and I wonder what you think should come next here, Morgan. Israel is promising consequences. The United States is trying to prevent a wider war. To what extent can the U.S. influence next steps?
I mean, listen, preventing the wider war went out the window a long time ago.
Is this the wider war?
Hezbollah has... It's been here. Of course, the U.S. Navy is seeing more action. Our U.S. Navy ships are seeing more action in CENTCOM than we have seen since World War II. And this is from the Houthis, a terrorist group shooting ballistic missiles and sophisticated drones at our U.S. Navy. What did we say after 9/11? That we were never going to let terrorist groups have these capabilities, and now they can shoot ballistic missiles at our ships. Not only at our ships, we have them shooting at our diplomatic and military facilities. We've got Hezbollah shooting almost 10,000 rockets at Israel since October 8th. It started on October 8th of last year. They haven't drawn back to the 2006 lines. So for me, this wider war has been here for a long time. And really, in April, whenever Iran did the last attack, over 100 missiles and ballistic missiles at Israel, that was the first time in April when you saw an attack that emanated from Iran go physically into Israel. That's where they crossed the Rubicon. They've done it again today. Just because they have bad aim, and just because the United States is sophisticated enough, along with Israel, to intercept this, doesn't mean that the intent wasn't there from Iran to kill Israeli and American civilians.
Well, so Morgan, I guess it's a question if this already is the wider war, of just how wide it gets. As we have heard Donald Trump repeatedly on the campaign trail suggesting that he sees the world on the brink of World War III. And in part of the statement he put out after today's events, he said if Kamala gets 4 more years, the world goes up in smoke. Is this a reasoned assessment of the geopolitical reality or fear-mongering?
How can it not be? You have the worst war on European soil since World War II that's gone on for now over 2 years, a total mismanagement by this administration and a deterrence failure, a massive deterrence failure in the first place when Putin invaded. Now you have the worst killing of the Jewish people in any single day since the Holocaust. You also have, again, as I've said, the U.S. Navy ships seeing more action than they have since World War II. So, I mean, you have literally Europe and the Middle East burning it on fire, and you have the Biden-Harris administration saying that they are managing escalation. I don't know what that means. All I know is every time they take a step, things get worse.
So, Morgan, just to be clear, you think we could be on the path realistically to World War III?
Call it whatever you want. I mean, that's to me, that's just a headline. That's just something attention grabbing. The reality is that we have two of the worst wars that we have seen in decades since World War II. In Europe and in the Middle East. That's the reality. And so you just pray and hope that whomever is elected in December, that they have the fortitude and the ability and insight to deter Xi Jinping from taking action in Asia. We're just a slip away from something happened over the Second Thomas Shoal between China and the Philippines. There's incursions, land incursions between China and India. And obviously we know the nightmare scenario, the possibility of something happening over Taiwan. Xi Jinping has said repeatedly that he wants the PLA to be ready for 2027. That's in the next administration. That's in 2 years. So for me, historians 15 years from now can look back at this moment. But to say, listen, within 3 months of Biden and Harris taking over, Hamas was attacking Israel the first time. We've seen Kabul fall to the Taliban there, Americans left behind, equipment left behind. Again, historians in 50 years can name this time whatever they want. It is full of chaos. It is full of instability. And the world doesn't feel like America is in charge right now.
Well, it sounds to me like you're talking about the potential for global war here and a sobering assessment from Morgan Ortagus on this debate night. She's the founder of Polaris National Security. Morgan, it's good to have you back here on Bloomberg. Coming up, tensions clearly escalating after Iran launched more than 100 missiles into Israel today. And our political panel will weigh in next on the implications for the presidential race. It's next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
This tit for tat is going to go on for a while. It isn't going to suddenly come to an end. The real question is whether Iran, in the end, wants a wider war, whether Israel ultimately wants to strike back at Iran. That'll tell us a lot about whether or not we're going to see a much wider war in the Middle East, which I think will be bad for all the parties.
That was Leon Panetta, former Secretary of Defense, joining us earlier this hour here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And we have just heard from the Iranian foreign minister who posted on X that Iran exercised self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, going on to say we did so after exercising tremendous restraint for almost 2 months to give space for a ceasefire in Gaza. Our action is concluded unless the Israeli regime decides to invite further retaliation. In that scenario, our response will be stronger and more powerful. So what retaliation could we see from Israel, of course, is our question this evening. And joining us now as we consider the political implications of this is our signature panel, Rick Davis, Stonecourt Capital partner, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. They are both here with us in New York. So as we consider the fact that obviously a war has been ongoing in the Middle East, but perhaps this is officially a new front that has opened up between Israel and Lebanon, now Iran striking Israel directly for the second time in 6 months. We talk about wartime presidents. What about wartime vice presidents? Rick, what does this do, the optics of this being in the headlines for the ongoing presidential campaign for Kamala Harris as a member of this administration?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Republicans use very effectively the fact that Joe Biden was the oldest president and that Kamala Harris, as his vice president, would most likely potentially have to serve. Well, now the shoe is on the other foot. Donald Trump is the oldest candidate for president in history, and I think that's a different perspective that Vance is going to get tonight than Walz. I think people will look at Vance and say, he could be president. What are his qualifications in a time of crisis like this? And I think he'll get an unfair comparison because his wagon is tied to the oldest candidate for president in history. So I think both of them have to jump through some hoops tonight on national security, but I think the lens that Vance will be seen through is different.
So is the job tonight then to make that argument, as Rick suggests, that they could step in a heartbeat away, could do this job, or are they going to be carrying water for the top of the ticket here to make the case that Donald Trump or Kamala Harris are the more effective commander-in-chief?
The number one job is to make the case for the person at the top of the ticket. But to Rick's point, given Donald Trump's age, J.D. Vance has to show people that he can be trusted. God forbid something happens if Donald Trump is elected, to step into his shoes. So he's got that added extra burden, if you will. And of course, Tim Walz has his own burden because Tim Walz is less well known. He hasn't done as many interviews, all of those kinds of things. But can we just say really what happened today? I have to just say this. Donald Trump made what happened in Israel with Iran hitting Israel about him. And so when you talk about, you know, who do you want to be in the White House as a wartime president? Israel is hit with almost 200 ballistic missiles. And Donald Trump is saying, if I was there, if I did this, if I was there. And what was Kamala Harris doing? She was in the Situation Room. She was talking with the president. She was doing the job of the president. And those optics do matter. And I think we should underscore that because Donald Trump does himself and his ticket no favors when he continues to do this, whether it's on social media or otherwise. And he did both today.
Well, and we did hear from the vice president. She spoke earlier about the fact that she was in the Situation Room, also talking about how the U.S. stands with Israel steadfastly in its own defense. But there is the question here, considering what we saw in the primary campaign for Joe Biden, the uncommitted vote in states like Michigan garnered more than 100,000 votes in the primary. They were choosing not to vote for him over the ongoing issue of the war in Gaza. Is there a risk that that kind of movement is reignited 5 weeks out from the election with the kind of deaths we're seeing now, not just in Gaza, but in Lebanon? There were 55 people there killed today, according to authorities.
It's a real risk for the Harris ticket. The undecided movement decided not to endorse her, and that was a big statement, obviously not endorsing Donald Trump as well. But does the fact that they are going to stay home potentially impact her? I think it is absolutely a possibility and something she's going to have to deal with. And this is the line that the campaign has been walking since October 7th, whether Joe Biden was at the top of the ticket or now Kamala Harris.
White House was quick to let us know today that Kamala Harris was in the Situation Room with Joe Biden watching this in real time. How powerful is that optically for the vice president to be seen doing the job?
Yeah, I think that it's only going to be better when they release some photos of that session.
Coming, right?
That's coming. And look, I mean, it's very important for Kamala Harris to establish in the minds of voters, especially those swing voters, that she can be commander-in-chief on day one. This is not about being in training. This is about the day you're elected, you become commander-in-chief. And so far, based on the survey data that we've seen, she seems to be checking that box. I mean, she's, had this meteoric rise in the polls with her favorables, and that has included certain attributes, and one of them is can be commander-in-chief. So this just helps reinforce it. You're not going to blow through this news cycle talking about anything else. You're going to have to embrace it. And doing it the way they've done it today, I think, has been very skillful.
Well, and of course, this is only one thing they've had to be dealing with today. We also saw today the beginning of a strike affecting dozens of ports along the U.S. East and Gulf Coast that could potentially have economic consequences. Donald Trump actually just issued a statement on the dockworkers strike saying that they should be able to negotiate for better wages. We are hearing from the White House that they want to see collective bargaining in action despite some calls for President Biden to intervene in this strike. Jeannie, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are very vocal about being pro-union. Can you do that this close to an election if unions are starting to cause some economic turmoil in the United States?
It's another of a big challenges. It has not been a good 72, 48 hours for this administration or for the campaign, certainly. And Donald Trump is absolutely right to put out that statement. But let's just remember, it wasn't, not forget, just a few weeks ago, a week or two ago, when he said, if you're going to go on strike, you should be fired. So Donald Trump seems to change like the wind. This is a very difficult time for the Harris campaign and the Biden administration because the strike can have potentially really big economic impacts. So that is certainly on the minds of voters. And, they are not in any good position to resolve this because they don't want to go against labor and risk losing the labor vote. And they certainly don't want the economy disrupted. I think in the end, they have to do what's right for the economy. And I think they may have to take a really hard stance on this.
All right. So I have to ask, does Kamala Harris go walk the picket line like the boss did earlier this year?
I don't think she has to walk the picket line. I think that she can be well positioned. Remember, she can give a speech tomorrow that says we have built a much more robust supply chain than Donald Trump gave us in the middle of COVID. And that would be true. And that supply chain can help buffer big changes in things like the Dockworkers strike. But I think it'd be a huge mistake for Donald Trump to get on the wrong side of history here. His voters are blue-collar voters, right? They're the ones most likely to be the dockworkers. And so if he lets Kamala Harris get to the right of those workers and be supporting their efforts against corporations, and I would say on an election campaign, you always want to be on the side of the workers. You never want to be on the side of the corporations, right? And so I think they are firmly planted there, and that's what you're starting to see is I think the Trump campaign in Mar-a-Lago have realized, oh, we're on the wrong side of this fight. We're not supposed to be for these corporations. We're supposed to be for the workers.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how the lines are drawn on this issue tonight, because indeed, coming up, Fight Night in New York. J.D. Vance and Tim Walz set to go head-to-head. It's only hours away, and our political panel will weigh in next on what could be the impact of tonight's debate on the campaign. The strategies coming up next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in New York, where we are looking ahead to tonight's vice presidential debate. Just a couple of hours from now, at least the start of our special coverage, 8 p.m. Eastern time. The actual debate at 9. And back with us, our political panel. They're here for the duration. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Let's talk strategy. I'd love to hear what both of you think about what is about to transpire. Both of these guys have something to prove tonight. Rick, if you're J.D. Vance, are you there to talk about Donald Trump or Kamala Harris?
Well, J.D. Vance has a constituency of one, Donald Trump. So he's the only one he has to make happy. So he doesn't want to stray anywhere around anything that's not Donald Trump orthodoxy. And if he does, he's likely to be corrected on a live feed by Donald Trump himself tonight on True Social. Yes. So he's walking a very dangerous line. And I think for Walz, he just has to stick to his talking points, right? He's been very scripted up to this point in time. He has a decent following. But Kamala Harris, they need to just keep the momentum. So don't get in the way of the momentum. A vice presidential debate can't help you get momentum, but it can help you drain momentum. And so it's all on the downside from my perspective for Walz. Wow.
Well, of course, one of the reasons we were talking about when she selected Walz was his folksy nature, the kind of aw shucks mentality, phrases like "you're weird." Does that work as well in a forum like this when they're looking, as we were discussing earlier, at someone who might need to step into the role of president of the United States should the situation arise?
Yeah, I think we may hear that, but I think it's going to be policy focused. Your policies are weird as opposed to you personally are weird. And you mentioned the folksiness. These are two Midwestern guys, and, Midwestern nice they're supposed to be. I don't know if we're going to see it tonight.
I think we can agree J.D. Vance and Tim Walz have different styles.
Different styles. It's going to be, amazing to see, because they really don't seem to like each other very much. I mean, I can't remember a debate, well, maybe Trump and Harris, where there was so much animosity between the two.
Of course, tonight the mics will be unmuted. I wonder, Rick, who you think that advantage is. And are we going to be talking about policy a la Bloomberg, the conversations that we have, or is this about eating cats and dogs in Springfield and stolen military valor?
Well, I do think that it depends a little bit on the moderators. And so Margaret Brennan, I guarantee, is going to dive into national security and foreign policy questions. And Norah O'Donnell will probably keep them honest and ask questions related to their bosses. Yeah. And they're going to have to adequately represent what their bosses believe. So I think as long as those moderators keep the pace and keep their feet to the fire, we know they're not going to do any fact-checking tonight, so how are they going to keep this on the rails? But I do think live mics is the way to go, and it'll be interesting who has the discipline to not oversell.
Well, on the fact-checking, Jeannie, obviously that was a factor in the ABC debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Donald Trump will not be on the stage tonight. Is it as necessary with these two?
You know, I think it is probably a good decision to let them fact check each other, even just because of the time constraints when the moderator steps in and tries to clarify. So I think that's okay. I know you guys are going to fact check when we come back after it, so we don't have to worry. But we do know what they are going to say about Tim Walz, because they said they're going to call him Traitor Tim. That's in addition to the other Tim word that Donald Trump was calling him. But the best part of the day was Donald Trump going completely opposite his campaign, because his campaign is saying Tim Walz is really well prepared, on and on and on. He's really good, trying to raise expectations. And Donald Trump said he's a moron. So, you know, he just can't stick to script. And I think J.D. Vance will.
Wow. Setting of the bar is important to consider here. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, thank you. And of course, Rick and Jeannie will be back with us for our special coverage and simulcast of tonight's CBS Vice Presidential debate, starting here live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. We'll see you in a couple of hours right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.